Hello and welcome to my new series, which is about editing. I've been gone for a while from my YouTube channel. I sort of lost interest in it, if I'm honest. But what's inspired me to do this series is I did a critique session on my Facebook group that I run recently, and the main overriding thing that I took away from it is really how poor the average photographer's editing is. The skills in Photoshop or Lightroom, whatever they choose to use, it's really not good. And so I thought I would do a series of pretty short videos that cover all the basic techniques that you need. I've started on this screen because this is one of the last times that I went out photographing in the landscape. All this series is going to be based around landscape photography, but most of it is applicable to many different types. And I'm going to start with a very simple image. You can see here how I photograph. I take plenty of shots, so I've decided to photograph this tree, and I've taken it with different exposures, with slightly different compositions. I'm going to choose this image, right click, open with Photoshop, and it takes me straight into Camera Raw. You'll see the original screen was black and white because at the time I was photographing with my camera set to black and white. That means the JPEGs are automatically turned to black and white in the camera, but the RAWs maintain colour. But because it was a misty day, obviously there's not much colour in the scene. So here's my basic panel to the side, and this is where I do most of my editing in Camera Raw. The first thing I do is click this item 6 along. It's called lens correction. I just click, and that does a basic lens correction, and I always click that. Next, I just look at the scene, look at the photograph and think, what do I want to do? I don't do any cropping at this stage. I just think, how do I want to change this scene? And my first port of call is always with the curves adjustment. So I'm going to go into depth about curves in one of the future videos that I do. I'm going to do a whole video on understanding the histogram and understanding curves. But for this first video, I just want to cover the basics of how I go about a basic edit. So here's my curve. Here's my histogram. I have my histogram set to point. You can turn it to parametric. I don't like it on parametric. I like it on point. And you can just left click and move this curve around. And really all we're doing is we're adjusting. We're not actually changing the histogram, but we're changing where our range of tones start and end. So at the moment, these are the blacks. You can see there's no blacks at all. The blacks start about here. So if I take this across, I left click and drag, and there, they're just going black. And if we look, see it's gone blue up in the top corner there. That means I'm beginning to have pure black in my photograph. I don't want pure black. So I pull it back to there, and that's darkened down the darks. Again, up here, these are the whites. So you can see I'm nowhere near the white. If I pull it across, eventually, boom, this goes up in the top right hand corner, turns white. That means I've now got pure whites, and they're probably here. It looks like it disappears the image into the background there. So I don't want pure whites. I'm going to pull that back to about there, and then what I can do is I can pick points on the curve and adjust it. So if I left click and pull, I'm brightening these tones that are not white, but they're near the whites. And if I pull these down, left click and pull, I'm darkening these darker shades down here. But I want to actually lighten those darker shades. So I'm just leaving that sort of straight. In fact, if anything, I'll just push it up a touch. I want it a little lighter. There we go. And that's my basic curves adjustment. Having done that, I then click back on the first tab, which is basic, and I go back to my panel, and I'll think I'll add a bit of vibrance. I never use saturation, or should I say I rarely use saturation. I almost always use the vibrance. It's a bit more subtle and it doesn't oversaturate things. Dehaze, I like dehaze, and I like it both in the positive sense and in the negative sense. Sometimes to give me that softer, mistier kind of effect. But on this one, I'm going to add just a bit of dehaze. Clarity, I'm very careful with clarity. And I'm going to add some negative clarity just to keep it soft, because it's a soft and misty image. I don't want to completely get rid of that. I'll just add a little bit of texture. When I use negative clarity, I use a bit of texture just to sharpen that tree up. So from here, I often have a play with the blacks. It's really doing the same as we did in the histogram, but this time I'm actually, rather than adjusting the curve, I'm actually maneuvering the actual histogram. So as I move the black to the left, if you look at the histogram up here, you'll see the whole histogram slides to the left, and eventually that blue line, and when it goes white, it means I've got pure blacks. But I don't want pure blacks. So I'm just going to have a little -5, a little bit of blacks there. Whites, again, I've given it a bit. It's +12 just to add a bit more punch. And then sometimes when I add white, I pull the negatives back just a touch. And really all I'm doing is I'm playing with the tones within the image. I go to the fourth block along, which is HSL adjustments. And these are all my different colour channels. So I've got all the basic colours, and then I can adjust the hue, the saturation and the luminance of each one of these. There's not a lot of colour in this scene, so I could play with these, but the reality is I see this shot as a black and white. So in the front panel, instead of colour, I'm going to click black and white, and it turns into a black and white there. And from there, I can go back to this fourth panel, and it's now changed to black and white mix. So all it lets me do is adjust the brightness of each of the individual colours. So if we'll remember this bottom bit, there was quite a bit of orange in there. So if I push the orange to the right, it brightens up that bottom. If I push it to the left, it darkens it. And then it's to personal taste. I like it a bit brighter, so I'm going to have it there. And similarly to the orange, there were yellows down there. So I'm going to do the same with the yellows. And the sky was generally blue. I probably won't adjust that, but if I did, yeah, you see, it's just lightening that top of the sky up there a bit, which I like. Now, having done that, I often go back to my original panel or back to the curves and say, now that I've gone black and white, maybe I do want to adjust it, and I'll have another play with the curve. And there we go. So that's my basic camera raw edit. And from there, I go open image, left click. And that now opens into Photoshop. So that's very basic. I go through that process on almost every image. One of the things that I recommend highly, I learnt this off watching a video of Joe Cornish, and it's having the background to my image white. If it's, a lot of people have it black or grey, and it makes the image look more dramatic, but you won't edit correctly. Now I've gone into this screen, looking at this white background, I can see that I think the whole image is a bit too grey. So I want to brighten that up. So I'll duplicate the image, which is left click down to this plus, and that duplicates the image. I'm going to go through layers and the use of layers in depth in another video, but as I say, for the time being, I'm just showing you the basics of how I do it. I've duplicated my image, I'm going to duplicate it again. And now this top layer I'm going to take back into camera raw. So I go up to the top where it says filter, left click filter, and it says camera raw filter, left click, and it takes just that top layer back into camera raw to this panel. And what I want to do now is I want to brighten these light greys, the sky, because they're a bit too grey. There we go. And I click back and it's gone back into camera raw, so I can now see the grey and the new brightened version, which I prefer. So once I'm happy with that, which I am now, I'm going to crop the image. So I go to this left panel, the crop tool, I click left click, and it gives me a choice of formats, of ratios. If I left click on the arrow, these are the basics that I use. 4:6. If it's the wrong way up, you can click the two opposing arrows and it changes it. But for this image, I'm going to go 8:10, like that. And then all you do is you left click on the box and then you can just move this box around. If I wanted, I could bring that in by just left clicking and moving. But I want the full height of the image on this. I'm selecting where I want it within the frame, which is there. Click the tick, and that's now cropped. And that has also cropped all of the layers below as well. Now there's a few little things that I would normally do. There's an area here where it goes quite bright and quite bright, which I would like to darken up. This is a technique that I often use. You probably, if you're new to Photoshop, this will be a bit tricky for you. I'm going to just use a clone brush, clone stamp should I say. I'm going to set it to darken, take my opacity down. Just going to darken that edge there. And I'll do the same over here. That's it, it's just done enough. There's lots of ways of doing that technique, and I'll go into that in more depth in future videos, but for the time being I just wanted just to do that. And that's my finished edit. I'm not going to go any further into it. It's not an amazing picture, but it's just a basic edit of, not by far my greatest picture, but it's a good example to start with. So there we go. If you followed everything that I've talked about there, great. That means you understand the basics of Photoshop, layers, adjustments, curves, brilliant. In future videos, I'm going to go into more manipulation of colour, split toning, and the real art of really pulling the soul out of a raw file. You know, really making an image sing, which is where a lot of people fall down. But to start off, these are the basics, and I know a lot of people don't even understand these basics. So there we go. That's it. Now I will just add, I'll show you how I save it. There's nothing on it. These layers are the same, so I can left click into the bin. That's my finished image. So I'll left click on file, save as. I'll save it in my pictures. It's a PSD, a Photoshop document, and I'm just going to click save. So it's saved those layers. I'm now going to left click on layer, flatten image. It merges the layers together into one, and now I'll go file, save as, and I'll change it from a PSD, left click, into a JPEG, save. So it's saved that high res image as a JPEG. And then if I wanted to share it on Photoshop, I will go image, image size. I change the resolution to 72. I change the width to 1280. Okay. And that'll look great on Facebook, that now. at 1280. So I go File, Save As, and then I call it 1280, and I save it. Okay. I can then close Photoshop down, and when I go into my pictures, some dodgy portraits there, and here are the images. So I've got the 1280 resize for Facebook, social media, I've got the high-res JPEG, and I've got the PSD. And if you look at all my images, I pretty much always have 3 images of them all, whatever they may be, and that's how I do it. So I hope you got something from this, and I think it's going to be a good advice. It's going to be not advice. I think it will be good practice for almost everybody to follow all of these videos as I progress through. People generally love going out with the camera. They love taking photographs. They don't enjoy, not so much they don't enjoy editing, they don't enjoy learning how to edit and get the best out of their files. All the best photographers that I can think of, the best landscape photographers, are all at the very minimum competent on Photoshop. And most of them are really good, because it makes a massive difference. Being able to just take that image from being a decent image to being a spectacular image requires knowledge of how to edit an image. So by following these videos that I'm going to do one a night for the next however long it takes till I run out of things to say, really, probably a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to take you through all of the different processes I use, getting more and more technical. And hopefully if you follow me through and use these techniques and practice them on your own images, you too will never again have to post in the group an oversaturated, wonky, overexposed image, because we're going to have the skills to get the best out of your raw files. So thanks for joining me, and I'm going to post another tomorrow night. I'll see you soon.